They were trapped, enveloped in darkness. They had searched for and found each other and were now huddling together for warmth. The temperature was now beyond imaginable. Their breath was freezing in midair, sending a rain of small ice shards onto them every time they exhaled. Jackal was terrified. He had never been more terrified in his life, and he didn't know why. He had a guess as to why. The way their father acted, he had never done anything like that before. He had acted strange sometimes, like all the times he hadn't let them go out and join in the festivities during solstices or eclipses. And now this secret room with a secret chest and a strange symbol, his reaction to the strange weather topped it all. But Jackal felt like there was more to his fear, and he just couldn't lay a finger on it. And the more he thought about it, the scarier it got. It had only been a few minutes after their father left when they heard the screams. It started with one, then a cacophony of wails and shouts grew outside, building into a mass hysteria. The room was getting hotter now. A faint light came from under the door, which grew brighter and brighter as the room continued to get hotter and hotter. Kiara got up and started to feel around for the door. That's what Jackal thought. He couldn't actually see her. His suspicions were confirmed when he heard a loud thumping.
"What are you doing?"
He yelled at her.
What do you think?
She retorted.
I'm getting out of here.
Jackal leapt up and tried to pry her away from the door. Jackal swallowed his next words as the light from under the door became a bunch of flames, licking up at the wood and slowly consuming it. Kiara was a lot stronger than he had expected. He was thrown to the wall, whether to get him away from the flames or just get him off her, he didn't know. All he knew was that with one final blow, the door flew open into the flames. The whole house was on fire. The floor was exceedingly hot. Flames were licking up the walls and pooling on the ceiling. Kiara sprinted straight for the door. She grabbed the handle just as a shape burst through it, pummeling her to the ground. It was difficult to make it out through the smoke, but just enough to see. The shape looked human with 2 legs, 2 arms, a torso, and a head. But there was something wrong with it. He couldn't move. He didn't want to move. Even though he could hear his sister struggling under the thing that had her pinned to the ground, he was solid with fear. But then, driven by a sudden urge to save his sister, he charged the being and knocked it through the deteriorating wall. Kiara leapt up just as another burst through the roof and landed behind them. Jackal could see it clearly now as it took a moment to survey the scene. It crawled like a human on all fours, but never once did its knees touch the ground. It looked human enough, but for the thing that proved it wasn't, was that the face was fake. All it had were 4 plates, which slid back over the head, revealing a wide mouth filled with thin, serrated teeth. Above the mouth, where the nose and eyes should have been, were 2 long tentacles, which were retracted into its head. As they came out probing, Jackal could see that they had barbs covering the entirety of them. Some of the barbs were dripping with what he could only assume was some sort of venom. The thing lunged, tentacles flailing at them. The barbs caught Jackal's sleeve and tore off a patch of fabric. The barbs didn't so much as touch his skin, which was a miracle. There was a rush of air as Kiara grabbed hold of his arm and jumped out the window. They fell with the glass before landing on the ground with a thud. The wind was knocked out of Jackal and he struggled to inhale his next breath while he covered his face with his arms to keep the glass from lacerating it. He peered out through his arms, looking up to see the thing leap out of the window and onto the ground above his head, which was behind him. He rolled onto his stomach before clambering up to his knees, but he couldn't move fast enough and it was upon him, pinning him to the outside wall of the store. In the last second, the sword came down and beheaded the creature. Jackal watched horrified as the lifeless corpse fell to the ground with a thud. A hand grabbed the front of his shirt and brought him up to face his father.
I thought I told you to stay.
Jackal looked at his father, confused. The house was aflame. His father must not have been thinking straight. He didn't even look like himself. He was wearing chainmail under a light armor that Jackal had never seen before. Their father was covered in cuts, bruises, scrapes, and blood. With the fire consuming the whole town behind him, he looked like a demon of war.
We weren't going to be burnt alive in our own home.
Kiara blurted before he could say anything.
No, you wouldn't have. Ugh, you don't understand.
Jackal looked back at the creature that had been slain, but it had disappeared. All that remained was an imprint on the ground. No tracks leading away from the imprint, nothing. As he looked around to see where it could have gone, he saw more of them. But they were crawling over the roofs and on the walls. People were running back and forth, screaming in terror as the things picked them off one by one.
You need to get out of here,
their father said, his voice stern and commanding like a general's.
Go, run and hide in the woods.
What about you?
Jackal asked.
I'll be fine, just go.
Another creature burst from the roof of the building behind their father, sending a shower of shingles onto them. It leapt onto a child and wrapped its barbed appendages around their torso. Then it dragged her, screaming into the flames. As soon as they were gone, another ran from around the side of Jackal's house and made a beeline for them. Probably the one who pushed through the wall back for revenge. This one met a face worse than the first. His father stepped forward and brought his sword straight through its body, from its head to its tailbone, symmetrically splitting it down the middle. The two halves dissolved into dust particles.
Go!
He yelled. This time it was Jackal who ended up dragging his sister through the flames. They reached the main gate that went out to the woods. They didn't even falter when they heard the screams of pain and fighting yells. They started to climb. It was extremely difficult with the commotion and destruction as the town was ripped and torn apart by those things. One of the creatures nosed them and let out a growl that made them freeze in place. Jackal saw the thing rush them and flinched, expecting the end. But all he felt was a rush of air as the creature dissipated to dust. Jackal looked back and saw Mrs. Harem, her arms ablaze with magic.
You go!
She yelled, turning back to the fire. She sent another blast towards a monster that had wrapped itself around their father.
We'll hold them off. Go!
Their father yelled. He took up his sword and stood back to back with Mrs. Harem. They worked as a team and started to take on the horde. This added another layer of questions to Jackal's list. But the adrenaline finally took hold and they continued, climbing faster. They reached the top and climbed over the other side and dropped to the ground below, then sprinted for the woods.